you really don't want to summon a UAP unless you know what you're doing.
Indaghiamo la disclosure da più di 2 anni. In questo tempo abbiamo sentito i protagonisti della disclosure sostenere che non siamo soli, che qualcuno vive insieme a noi sul pianeta, da prima che gli umani fossero presenti. Quindi non possiamo sostenere che siano alieni. Ed è per questo che è stato creato il termine NHI, Intelligenze non umane, Non-Human Intelligences. Sembra anche che gran parte del fenomeno UFO sia gestita da intelligenze artificiali. Sembra anche che ci siano delle NHI che non hanno nessun interesse in noi, ma altre che sono malevole e altre benevole. Qualcuno li chiama demoni e angeli, ma queste sono solo etichette che abbiamo dato negli ultimi 2000 anni. In realtà andrebbero interpretate come differenti forme di vita. Sappiamo anche che gli americani hanno almeno un programma di reverse engineering UFO, dei velivoli che si sono schiantati, o sono stati catturati o sono stati donati dall'NHI. Un programma legacy significa semplicemente che va avanti da quando è iniziato, cioè circa 80 anni fa. Il nome è Immaculate Constellation. Hanno anche una macchina con cui attirano gli UFO che funziona il 100% delle volte, detta il richiamo per i cani, il fischietto per i cani. Sappiamo con certezza che ci sono cattive notizie, sconvolgenti, ma non è chiaro di cosa si parli. Tutte queste affermazioni le abbiamo sentite dire più e più volte e le abbiamo affrontate in molteplici episodi. Oltre a tutto ciò, recentemente sono 2 le questioni che vengono richiamate prepotentemente. Che si va verso un contatto personale con le entità benevole, sfere luminose blu o forse bianche, molto brillanti. Gli UFO o sono una manifestazione di un'intelligenza superiore che cerca di mettersi in contatto con noi e lo fa da millenni senza grande successo, oppure qualcosa di malevolo che cerca di influenzarci per un suo tornaconto personale. Il fenomeno non sembra essere una cosa sola, ma si manifesta in modi diversi. Potete chiamarlo campo di coscienza quantistico, come dice Fagin, oppure la sorgente, oppure Dio se siete religiosi. Ma più probabilmente ci sono più fenomeni, più entità diverse coinvolte. E secondo noi sono intelligenze artificiali, entità benevole, entità malevole e il famoso campo di coscienza quantistico, come lo chiama Fagin. Non sembrano essere alieni di un altro pianeta. Probabilmente in alcuni casi sono intelligenze non umane che provengono da altre dimensioni. Una di queste dimensioni è l'aldilà. A grandi linee, questo è lo scenario. Nel caso dell'UFO a forma di uovo, anche se viene chiamato velivolo e vola, certamente non è un velivolo secondo la nostra definizione di velivolo. Dentro non ci sono entità e non sappiamo né come né perché venga creato, ma sembra provenire dall'aldilà, che è evidentemente una delle dimensioni da cui provengono le intelligenze non umane. Ma perché utilizziamo il termine manifestazione? Perché, come ci insegna Federico Fagin, questa realtà è creata dalla mente, quindi una mente superiore alla nostra sembra che crei questi mezzi. Oggi continuiamo a indagare e approfondire grazie a 3 diversi episodi di reality check di Ross Coulthard, sintetizzati in un nostro episodio. Riteniamo che ci sia poca coerenza ultimamente con le dichiarazioni, basti ricordare le dichiarazioni di Tom DeLonge sul CE5, ma senza andare così lontano, le domande più importanti su questo argomento sono: ma chi stiamo evocando? E sappiamo con certezza cosa stiamo facendo quando evochiamo? E perché non si fanno vedere? Hanno avuto millenni per farsi vedere. Se sono così avanzati, se sono 1 milione di anni avanti a noi, perché non si dichiarano esplicitamente? Perché non ci mandano un segno chiaro a tutti quanti? Perché non intervengono per fermare le guerre? Perché non sono mai intervenuti per fermare anche solo una delle 2000 esplosioni nucleari di test che ci sono state negli ultimi 70 anni? Perché non c'è mai chiarezza di comunicazione né di intenti? E recentemente, perché i velivoli senzienti a forma di uovo provengono dall'aldilà? Oggi finalmente possiamo almeno dire che non siamo i soli a farci queste domande, ma purtroppo non avremo risposte né chiare né certe, come al solito.
The process by which they're using psionic engagement with the phenomenon, whatever it is not new. There's Dr. Stephen Greer's CE5, which has been used successfully and I think convincingly by Greer for many years. And more importantly, there are people who've contacted me ever since I first talked about psionics last year, telling me that they have an ability to somehow consciously connect with the phenomenon. I'm talking to people here in Australia, for example, who send me astonishing videos of them literally talking to objects on camera, and then these objects seem to respond in some way. I wish I could explain it. I wish I had all the answers. I wish I could explain how psionics works. It's a very, very exciting area of science, and much as the skeptics and debunkers will try and stick it all back in a sock and say it's rubbish and paranormal nonsense, I think we are on the cusp of a new paradigm. I think that there is a link between human consciousness and the phenomenon, whatever it is, and it's super exciting.
Now, Russ, he's going to reference here the dog whistle, which, viewers, you'll recall, Jake said in our last episode, they had a 100% effectiveness when they did this out on the range. Why does the dog whistle work? Why would NHI curiously respond to this on demand? Can't resist, Pavlovian behavior, anxious to interact.
That is the $1 billion question. I have no idea, and I wish I knew the answer. I don't think they know the answer. What they do know, though, and I think this has been observed at Skinwalker Ranch as well, is that there are certain frequencies that seem to attract the phenomenon. I don't know. I have no idea. It's interesting because I think if we all knew that, I think there'd be a lot of very annoying humans playing the same frequency and trying to attract the phenomenon. So I can guess that's probably why there's a degree of secrecy about exactly what the frequencies are and the manner in which they're transmitted. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that. And it's a question I'm also asking. What is interesting is if you watch the Skinwalker Ranch series, and I'm not saying that the 1.6 gigahertz frequency is the one that's used for the dog whistle, but in Skinwalker Ranch, they often talk about how they're detecting a frequency from the phenomenon at 1.6 gigahertz. And I do wonder what the connection is. I think this is such a new area of science.
Hey Ross, really loved your episode with Jake and Matt. Truly amazed at what Skywatcher is already accomplishing. The question here is, do you get the impression that there is knowledge in these programs pertaining to afterlife or continuation of consciousness after physical human death that is being kept from the public? If this is so, it would be really interesting to learn whether they have a means of communicating with a specific person who has passed on, given they're willing to communicate with them at all at that point.
Wow, this is a controversial area, of course, but yes, short answer. I had a meeting earlier this week with a guy who has had close encounter experiences where he believes he's been abducted. And in the course of my conversation with him, he told me that he also had an encounter with a spirit of a dead person who'd been murdered. And it was quite chilling because after the fact I went away and I corroborated certain aspects of what he told me from independent news reports from the time that he was describing. Quite chilling to see that. I do think whatever the phenomenon is, it's too simplistic to describe it as extraterrestrials, little green aliens from the planet Zug chugging from Zeta Reticuli at warp speed 5, for X hundred years to get to planet Earth and probe humans. I mean, I actually think it's more interesting than that. I do think that there is a distinct possibility that at the heart of all of this is it's also going to answer the ultimate question of what we are as humans. Are we merely meat robots, biological computers, where whatever our consciousness is, it resides in our brains and it dies when we die? Or is our consciousness part of something bigger? And do all humans, whether we realize it or not, have the ability to plug into a non-local consciousness? And could that explain how it is that people are able to allegedly communicate with the dead or people who are not of this realm? That's an area I'm going down right now. It's funny, when I first got into this subject, I read Leslie Kane's excellent book, about surviving death. And I was puzzled as to why Leslie had gone into the area of the afterlife when she'd been covering the UFO subject. And why did she write this excellent book on UFOs and then go on to the subject of the human spirit and spiritualism and the idea of human bodies surviving death? Now I understand the two are inextricably linked. And I'm on this journey as much as you guys are. I'm excited, really excited by what I get in the way of information on a daily basis. Some of it overwhelming, thousands and thousands of emails a week. But one of the consistent things that I get are people who assert an ability to communicate not only with entities from another realm, be it perhaps, I don't know, interdimensional or extra dimensional, I've got no idea. They're also asserting an ability to communicate with not only the dead, but people all around the world. I mean, I've seen things in the last few months that defy explanation. People with alleged remote viewing abilities who, in one case, could actually help somebody find a pair of lost headphones, for example. Where are my headphones? Well, I think you left them here. How did that person know that from thousands of miles away? They remote viewed it. They astral traveled it. I've got no idea. What fascinates me, though, about modern science is if you don't look, you don't find. And one of the problems, one of the issues I have with science, conventional science, is it has this dismissiveness about non-materialist science, that essentially ideas of the paranormal must be complete BS because they can't be. And there's been a tendency, I think, not to even do the research into these ideas. And now at the cutting edge of science, there are people like, for example, Professor Stu Hameroff, talking about the idea of a non-local consciousness. There are people like Gary Nolan talking about the Caudate putamen part of the brain, which it's theorized in some people might be larger than in other people and might allow those people an enhanced ability to communicate in the way that we're describing. Are there some people with literally different shaped brains which gives them the ability to connect their pineal gland with the universe? Because it's bloomingly obvious to me that the United States and other countries, particularly Russia, have secretly been working on psionic technology for much of the last 50 or 60 years. And as Jake Barber says, we don't need the state to prove or enhance what we've already done. We can do it ourselves. And that's what's really exciting about this, is citizen science can prove what the security state has suppressed. And that's why I think we're on the edge of a new paradigm, perhaps the cusp of a discovery that will be momentous, that could be earth-changing. Humans are about to discover a capacity, I suspect, that they never even knew they had.
We've got James Kirk. Dear Mr. Coulthart, I applaud your statement that there may be many alien civilizations visiting our planet. Do you think a technology can be developed to mimic the human brain to summon certain types of UAPs or UFOs? And could this technology be quantum-based?
So do I think a technology exists, or do I think a technology could be created that could mimic the human brain to summon UAPs? Is that the basic question?
Correct.
Well, I think the point of Skywatcher is that there's already a technology they claim that exists that can do that, and that's psionic technology. So we don't need to develop a technology, it already exists, James T. Kirk. I think I've seen psionic technology developed, shown and demonstrated, and I think it's real. I can't explain it. I don't know how it works. There's also the dog whistle, which is the electromechanical signaling device. And obviously Skywatch is being slightly coy and revealing the full extent of what it knows about the dog whistle. And I can't blame them because frankly, let's point this out to people. If it is the case that this device can summon UAPs, you really don't want to summon a UAP unless you know what you're doing. I don't think we need to replicate the human brain in order to be able to do this. I think the human brain's already capable of doing it.
Do you think it's safe that we summon them? What exactly is the message the NIH are receiving during the dog whistle? What if they get upset that they keep getting called?
Those are all incredibly good questions. And if people watch my interview with Jake Barber and Matthew Pines that we did about 2 weeks ago on Reality Check, we actually went into a lot of this where, we explored with Jake what they do. And ultimately, one of the things that I think Jake explained, which I'd love to hear more about, by the way, is that they have an oath that everybody swears on the area, on the range, before they actually do the summoning. They've also vowed at Skywatcher not to act offensively against NHI, which I think is absolutely crucial. That's a distinction from what I understand the United States government has been doing in collusion with private aerospace. As shocking as it may sound, the United States has secretly, the military has secretly been using high pulse microwave weapons to down UAP craft that it has been summoning using both psionics and the electromechanical dog whistle. I really think that's outrageous. Wouldn't it be terrible if our first engagement with a non-human intelligence was that humans acted offensively against a highly advanced intelligence? And what does it say about the benevolence of that intelligence that even though it's had that done to it, it hasn't wiped us out?
Absolutely. Let's go to our next question. This is from email. Kimberly Mackey sent this in. Hi, Ross. I would love to hear your thoughts on why private citizens with funding for places like Skywatcher and Skinwatcher Ranch have such great success, yet taxpayer funded places like NASA and other groups, which receive grants to research space, are not achieving the same success. Could they be keeping the public in the dark for more funding? Or could it be that these phenomenon are not from space, but from here within Earth?
Okay, there's two kind of questions in there. Firstly, I'll deal with the latter one first. I think there is a very high likelihood that part of the phenomenon that we're talking about is intraterrestrial, that it's from this planet, perhaps in another dimension in this planet, or perhaps deep underwater on this planet and out of sight of humanity. But I think there is a possibility that at least some of what explains the phenomenon is here with us in some way. What was the first part of the question? Forgive me, I'm still a bit dopey.
Absolutely. Why do places like Skywatcher and Skinwatcher Ranch, who have private citizens with private funding, why are they having so much success when places like NASA that are funded by taxpayers,
Okay.
they're not really
Gotcha.
seeing as much success?
Okay, I think NASA knows a hell of a lot more about the phenomenon than it prefers to let on. Now, it's very complicated, this, because I am not saying that the senior leadership at NASA knows everything. I've been in the weird situation where, without naming him, I've been able to speak to an extremely senior person who served in a very senior role at NASA. And they have assured me convincingly that they were not read in to any legacy UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program. But I'm aware from my own sources, I even know the name of the person in NASA, and I've passed that name on to the person who I was talking to, who is allegedly the gatekeeper inside NASA, who controls all legacy program issues inside NASA. The program's very clever. They don't use necessarily the top people to run their operation. They do keep a very close eye on nominally civilian governmental organizations like NASA to make sure they don't stumble across something that might blow their cover. And so they have people inserted, like moles, if you like, to keep an eye on what's going on. And I am persuaded that, yes, NASA has been sanitizing photographs and video to disguise, in some cases, things that have been recorded. I take particularly close interest, for example, as some of the space shuttle missions, notably STS-48 that I'm doing an awful lot of work on at the moment. For those who don't know STS-48, go to YouTube, put that in and have a look at it. It shows an object clearly appearing to avoid a flash of light from the planet and then zooming off into outer space after the flash of light. Now, certain NASA debunker skeptics, self-styled NASA spokespeople who aren't really, have asserted that those are space debris of some kind, perhaps ice particles from the thrusters on the shuttle. That does not bear out. And I've had good cause from recent sources that have got in touch with me to develop the view that there has been obscuring of photographs and videos inside NASA. But to suggest that this has been coordinated at a very high level inside NASA is another thing entirely. The legacy program is much, much cleverer than that. And I do believe that there are individuals in NASA who are aware of retrieved non-human technology. And indeed, I've spoken to some of them who are willing to tell me off the record that they do believe there is a cover-up. But I think the issue with NASA is quite complicated because I think it's a well-meaning institution that has been egregiously misled.
All right, Ross, we will go to the next question. This is from @Carol_Long. I know you love this topic. What happened to the drone sightings in the USA and other parts of the world? The news on these seems to have stopped suddenly.
Okay, well, if you believe the official narrative is that the drones all went away and that we were all deluding ourselves in a hyperbolic misunderstanding, and that these were largely normal flights flying in and around New Jersey, and that people were misidentifying normal, regular aircraft and drones for objects that were anomalous. Now, our News Nation correspondent, Rich McHugh, and you might want to use a segment from what Rich showed us, he was out at sea with, I think, a section of the US Coast Guard. Actually, no, he wasn't out at sea, he was on the beach after they got back in from being on the ocean. And he recorded an extraordinary interview, Megan, with people who had been out on the ocean and seen anomalous objects, indubitably anomalous objects. Moreover, I know, because I spoke to them at the time that they were doing it, that the Skywatcher team, including Jake Barber, were deployed over the Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey in December. And it's interesting because Jake Barber has now confirmed on the record what he'd confirmed to me off the record, which is that they did see anomalous objects over the Picatinny Arsenal, which is one of the most sensitive weapons installations in that part of the United States. It's located in northern New Jersey. So I've actually promised some Irish friends of mine that I would use the word bollocks. And I'm going to say bollocks to the whole claim that these drones can be prosaically explained. It's a cover-up. Somebody in the US government is lying. And frankly, there's not a lot we can do about it because the White House position, of course, is that these are FAA authorized drones, and that frankly does not survive scrutiny. It's complete bollocks. There is no basis at all to the suggestion that the FAA authorized these supposed incursions by authorized research drones. They've never provided any evidence to substantiate that there were authorized research flights, and I suspect that the recent announcement that the FAA would be conducting research drone flights over New Jersey is an ex post facto attempt to justify the bullshit line that they've perpetuated for the last few months. I can tell you that the people of New Jersey and their political representatives aren't buying it. I've also spoken more recently to certain people in the police force there who tell me they're not buying it either. They know what they saw.
Passiamo adesso ad un estratto di una lunga ma interessante intervista a Sean Cahill. è Dean Alioto, il regista di un nuovo film documentario dal titolo The Alien Perspective, la prospettiva degli alieni. Il film, disponibile su Prime a pagamento e in inglese, sembra essere molto interessante perché propone la prospettiva degli alieni e non quella degli umani, cioè il punto di vista degli alieni, rispetto all'incontro con gli umani a partire dal Tic Tac del 2004. Non l'abbiamo ancora visto, ma è certamente uno sforzo interessante spiegare il punto di vista degli alieni da parte dei protagonisti della Disclosure. A destra ritroviamo Sean Cahill, ex Chief Master Thanos sulla Nimitz nel 2004, durante l'incontro con il Tic Tac. È uno dei protagonisti del film, grande amico di Lou Elizondo, che ci racconterà alcuni dettagli che riteniamo molto interessanti.
I've always been struck with Sean. I've always admired your honesty and your candor, Sean, in speaking so openly about how profound that experience was for you. And I've always been intrigued by the fact that there were earlier experiences in your life that may in fact be connected to the broader experience that you had with the phenomenon. What's your take on that, Dean? What do you think of the idea that essentially what the phenomenon is trying to do is twig us, make us aware of it? Do something in our consciousness.
When I interviewed Sean, I thought I'm going to get kind of the logistics of this, but because I've worked on crime shows for 20 years, I tend to go a little bit deeper because I want to talk about how it affected them. What is the takeaway? Not just that moment, but the residual effect, like you had asked Sean about that. How does that affect you? And that blew my socks off. I mean, first of all, Sean is an extremely articulate person, has a great vocabulary when it comes to describing anything. And can concisely condense what it is that he felt. And so when I was talking to him, it became this thing where both of us got a little emotional as we were walking through this. This affected him on so many levels. And it wasn't just, bam, here you go, here's the brain dump. It was this time release thing. And so when I hear people say, you know, oh, experience or this or that, I'm going, you do know that experiencers aren't just people who are taken, abductees. There are people who are connecting. That is an experience. And so the levels that Sean is comfortable with sharing, which he did in the film and now, you know, personally, is a real testament to someone that is experiencing something that is a communion, as Whitley would say, with a higher intelligence. And why is that happening?
How many of the UAP experiences that you've interviewed have had the same experience as Sean, where, yes, they've had this one incident, be it the Ariel incident or the Rendlesham incident, but it always turns out in a large percentage of these cases, when they look back in their family history, there's something there. It might be a granny who saw spirits, or it might be a grandfather who saw a UFO when he was in the World War II. How often did you have that experience when you were doing the research?
Well, I have to caveat this. But first, most of them, there were some traces of this in their past. I say caveat because I'm not an experiencer that I'm aware of. My mother saw a UFO in the Bay Area off the water. She saw it look like it came out of the water. She thought it was a boat or submarine or something. It was dusk. It came up and then paused and then took off like it smeared the sky. I've been wanting to see this since I was a kid. And so Yvonne Smith, who has been gracious enough to let me go to abductee or experiencer support groups, and I've gone to a few. In fact, I'm one of the only filmmakers who's been allowed to film there, and that's a whole other documentary that I'll hopefully come back on your show and tell you about. I said to her, I go, why am I doing this? Because I've been at this for 7 years now, and it's got such a pull on me. And sometimes when I'm editing, I feel this like rush, this energy, almost like, you know, the hair back of my neck stands up. And I said, but I've come through my past. I have no memory, missing time, etc. And she laughed at me and said, Dean, they don't have to knock on your door to connect with you, which was both kind of scary and revealing. And so when I talk to these experiencers, I want to know that. I want to know what happened in your childhood. Were you always interested in this? And it doesn't really it's kind of like this memory that gets jogged when they have it as an adult. It's like, hey, remember us? And I'm curious to hear Sean talk about that some more. But inevitably, there was something that happened. I don't know if it's because, again, they're chosen or they're open to it. I think that might be it.
Sean, can I ask you, I don't want to put you on the spot because you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but what were the kind of early experiences and senses that you had as a child before the whole USS Princeton incident?
There were some that were as a very young child, we had an incident around Christmas where my sister had come into my room and there was something on the roof. I was convinced it was Santa Claus, and she told me it was Santa Claus, but she was incredibly frightened. She was absolutely terrified. And we ended up spending the whole night in my room. I must have been 5 or 6 years old. And we ended up against the door to my room on the floor with me kind of in a headlock hug that she had put me in. And as embarrassing it is, I remember wetting my pants trying to get away from her because I wanted to see Santa Claus, and she was crying. There were events surrounding that Christmas that were so strange that I have to attribute it to the phenomenon. In later years, in high school, I was involved in something with a couple of friends where we had all seen a beautiful meteor, just a giant green football moving slowly across the sky and spitting out these sparks out of the back that looked like it was from an old 1920s Buck Rogers film. Frankly, it looked ridiculous. And my memory of that was that we went back to my house and wrote songs for the band that night and talked about seeing that and kind of all separated and wrote it down, and that was it, and moved on. And years after meeting Luis Elizondo and kind of sitting down and going back through my memories, I called those two friends up, and they said they had a completely different memory of the evening, where we had driven up to Mount Hamilton Observatory chasing after this thing, and that I had exited the car and interacted with blue orbs in the parking lot of the Hamilton Observatory while they hid in the car. And I have no memory of that. And that probably, if anything, bothers me more. But even in the years after Tic Tac, I witnessed a incredibly large black triangle come over my house, which was definitely not a prosaic bomber I've guarded the B-2. I've been underneath it. I've been around them constantly. It was certainly not a B-2 or even any of its successors that might still be classified. And more so than that, I have to say that after meeting many of the persons that were involved in these programs that ended up evolving into the UAPTF and evolving into Aero, and many of the whistleblowers that are currently out, the hitchhiker effect that is described is a very real thing. And for a year or two after first getting involved in this community and in this research and spending so much time thinking about this subject, phenomena began to manifest in and around my home where my family was witnessing it as well. And that was really hard for them because they're not focused on this subject, interested. It's a peripheral thing in their life like it is for most people. And so it was very strange for my family to see these things happening and not understand. So
it's funny. I was just thinking as you were talking to me then about how Lou and Jen Elizondo have had similar experiences in their home.
Yeah.
And when I did an interview with Lou last year for his book, he's still a little bit shy about talking about some of those experiences. And I can understand why, because they just sound completely off the wall. Some of them are
He's given me permission to say that we've had experiences together while at his home that my family was also present for, and witnessed and videotaped things that others believe they've debunked. But at this point, we still certainly have not, and we're all rather educated on the subject. I mean, I was a crash accident investigator as part of my duties in the Navy for aircraft, and I know what aircraft look like, especially on high definition video that I've taken myself that I was present for. So it's very strange. There's a familial aspect for me as well. My father was a World War II Foo Fighters witness while the waist gunner and radio operator on a B-17.
Oh, this does my head in. I'm amazed how often this runs in a family. I had a conversation with I'll have to be discreet here, a federal minister of the Australian government about 6 months ago, and it still sticks in my head because he told me this incredible story about how He was walking out of a government office in the middle of central Sydney, so very crowded street. There's thousands of people at lunchtime, and he's waiting for the Crown car to come and pick him up. Very important guy. And he's there with his press secretary standing there with a bundle of papers. And as he looks up, he sees this giant metallic egg hovering in the square. And he looks at his press secretary, and his press secretary is clearly oblivious to it. And this minister is a very important figure in one of our governments, our previous governments. And he said to me, Ross, I will deny this if you name me, but basically, I want you to know it's real. And more importantly, I just knew I had to ask him, just as a matter of interest, did your dad or your mum or your grandfather, your grandma, did they have experiences? And he looked, how did you know? And it runs in families, this. It's really weird. And I feel it's a disservice to the reporting on this subject matter that we often don't discuss this aspect of the phenomenon, that it seems to be familial. It seems to run in family lines. What's going on? I mean, I know you don't have the answer, but speculate for me, Sean.
You know, my response to this at first, after TIC TAC, to be completely honest, was to run in the other direction from spirituality. The response of my chain of command and the response of those in leadership on board the ship at that time in my career had told me that what we were dealing with was understood. No, there's nothing to be afraid of. Get back to work. The big guys know what's going on. And now I understand that that's not true. That was just denial. That was just business as usual. And those folks moving on with their own lives. They had no interest in latching onto this whatsoever. But my response was actually to become rather self-destructive in my life. I went down, I had a period of alcoholism, a period of very selfish behavior. And part of it was because for me, the universe had just become nuts and bolts. It had just become math, and I wasn't going to get to know the mysteries. They probably weren't real anyway. And then that became such a burden, that self-abuse became such a burden that I finally broke and changed my lifestyle. I began meditating. I began practicing yoga, but practicing deep meditation while in the yoga, not just the Americanized group stretching, which is great for your health, but it's not the same as the reasoning behind the asanas and the different positions. But what I found was something inside of me that transcended everything else around me. I found an observer that was not concerned with the abuses I had been through in my life, that didn't need to win the race and didn't need to eat the cookie. And that showed me that there was something that at the heart of this, it's one thing to tell us all that our nuclear weapons are destructive. I think we know that our environmental practices are destructive. We know that. And that our wars are destructive. We know that, and yet we do them anyway. And we engage in this behavior every day because we have a 50-50 set of people, some of us selfish and some of us less so. And that what that does is create an environment where being your true and honest self is no longer something that is conducive to your survival. You must participate in this society of greed and want and need to have a proper life with your loved ones. And if there's anything I think they're waking us up to, it's that at the core of our actions, it's not about the bomb. It's not about the war. It's not about the pollution. It's about what's in our heart when we're committing those acts in our own home and against each other. And I don't think we understand that yet. And if we're lucky, they're here to tell us about that. And if we're not, they're here to pull one over on us and act the same way that we're acting to each other.
I might as well ask you this, Sean. Do you buy into, because there's two debates in ufology. One is the threat narrative, and the other is they're all lovey-dovey. And I don't ascribe to either of them. I think there's probably some malevolent, some benevolent, if there is life forms, and I'm sure there are. Isn't it a silly debate, that polar debate, whether or not there's a threat narrative behind the whole alien issue or whether they're benevolent? I know Dr. Stephen Greer, for example, gets very frustrated with the idea that we sometimes talk about a threat, that Lou Elizondo talks about the possibility of a threat being posed. But in and of itself, you're a military man by training. isn't something we don't understand a threat?
Absolutely. As a law enforcement officer, we talked about opportunity, intent, and capability when we were discussing suspects and the use of force and deadly force. The phenomena has the opportunity and the capability to do nearly anything it wants. It seems to defy physics. It seems to, at times, control the people, or at least manipulate their consciousness when they're interacting with them. All of these things are they're illegal if they were occurring within our society. So they're things that we cast moral aspersion on. The fact is, the phenomena does not make it easy for it to interact with. Regardless of what Stephen Greer says, sitting down and meditating is like opening up without understanding your intention, what you're aiming for, or what you're talking to. You have no idea. It's like picking up your telephone and just wondering if someone's going to be on the other side. You don't have a number you're dialing. You don't know. And it's clear that this phenomena understands our own consciousness better than we do. So while I won't say that the phenomena itself is negative, many of my experiences were borderline terrifying. If they are so advanced and so intelligent, I would appreciate an email or a phone call. And I don't mean to be flippant. You could send me an email and say, hey, come meet the phenomena in this field at this time, and we'll shake hands and and you don't have to be scared. But they don't do that. And so we're at a spot with the phenomenon where many are coming out and talking about psionics. They're talking about meditating. The term coined by Stephen Greer, CE5, which I don't include in J. Allen Hynek's CE1 through 4. I think that's for Mr. Greer alone, because it's not fair to say that you're calling in spaceships. I don't believe that what people are interacting with when they go into a beautiful place inside and meditate and phenomena manifest, I don't believe that's the same thing that may have been retrieved in 1947 by the US government. And I don't think it's the same thing that we send out paramilitary teams that rumor says are now conflicting with each other to retrieve these materials. I don't think anything I would pray through my heart to needs a vehicle to arrive here. And I'm not a religious man, but I think that we're really muddying the water by suddenly saying that you can sit down and meditate and control a spacecraft.
I agree. In fact, thank you for those very profound comments. I like Sean often think, why the hell don't these intelligences, if they exist, why don't they just manifest themselves? Why don't they just show themselves and be far more overt and put the mystery to rest? In the heart of it, isn't that the fundamental mystery behind whatever this intelligence is? And have you got an answer for me? Why? Why don't these intelligences, as Sean describes, they operate in such a weird way? They're just there out of the corner of our eye, trying to twig our consciousness. They've always been there, and I'm profoundly struck by how many people I've spoken to who are experiencers. When you needle them a bit, sometimes they don't even realize it, and they call me back a few days later and they go, you know what? I did have a granny who said she saw strange things in the kitchen once. People often realize after the fact that it's always... Why is that? What's going on?
I'm agnostic. I'm spiritual, but I try to be open to everything because first law is no one knows anything. Is that this is being controlled by them. I don't worry that much. It doesn't keep me up at night worrying about us being taken over, because it would be very simple for them to send the size of like fruit fly drones and drop some chemical that would melt humans, leave the animals if they want. You could assign it to certain DNA of a creature and then just move in. That's not the case. So I think we need to listen to what they're saying, and we need to work on ourselves and know that we are going to get there. And the proof that we're going to get there, where we do have that communion, is that they're not giving up. They keep coming and coming, and they're shaping certain things and technology and getting us to a certain place. But we have to do half the work. I always say we've got to meet them halfway on the bridge. One other little thing is I think that these experiencers, and this is a belief I have, and I hope no one's offended by it, but I do believe a lot of them, and John Mack talks about this, that they agreed to do this in another life. And there's some belief, there's a term belief that they have maybe come from their plan or their future, if they're from the future or another dimension. And this is all a reason. And I know this because when I went to my first experience of support group, I said, guys, what you're telling me is terrifying. I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't deal with seeing a monkey come around the deck in broad daylight on my deck. It would freak the crap out of me because it's out of context, let alone an alien. So you guys are so terrified by this. Show me, raise up your hands. How many people would, if they could go back, have this not happen after you've told me all this? And there's 15 people in this room, from lawyers, doctors, etc. And I said, raise your hand if you would still do this again. Every single one of them raised their hands.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because everybody I've spoken to thinks that the experience, albeit, as Sean says, at times terrifying, it's the most profound thing they've ever had happen in their life. The possibility that whatever this phenomenon is, it might be so far advanced that it's completely beyond our ken, that essentially it's completely indifferent to us like we are to ants. And I'm really struck by the fact that earlier in the conversation we had, you talked about the commanders, the people above you on that bridge, probably the admiral or the captain of the vessel, who seemed to be aware of what this phenomenon was. And it's interesting because that's the narrative that, frankly, pisses me off, that there is one part of society, which is government, people in the know, some sections of the military and the intelligence community. And I'm often struck by how often when I talk to some of these people privately, including people inside the program, inside the retrieval and reverse engineering program, and they tell me that the phenomenon is demonic, that it's evil. They talk about angels, and they see this through the prism of evangelical Christianity in particular. What do you think of that take, Sean?
I was raised Catholic. I never voluntarily participated in it. And as a young teenager, I made a proclamation that I would not return to church. And I never did, unless it was a wedding or a funeral, to be honest with you. I had a lousy relationship with what we all call God up until probably my late 30s, early 40s, when I began meditating. And when I began understanding finally that if you were willing to, you could find the piece of yourself that's more than flesh. And that, at least from my experience, it wasn't connected to any dogma or faith. And so then it became an investigation of the various world's religions and their various practices, and how do the holy people of those sects interact with their phenomena that they call God. I think we're dealing with a universe that we have looked at in a binary fashion, that we look at as either black or white, off or on, and occasionally a small gray area in the middle. But what we don't seem to understand yet is that everything in this universe is on a spectrum of some kind. And whether it's light, energy, matter, everything is vibrating. All of those things are important distinctions to make. Everything is truly connected, even if we don't feel it or can't parse how it's connected, if we can't see those connections. The fractality of the universe tells us that we are inside of a system that we just call life. And it's more complex than that. At the end of the day, the phenomena seems to understand it better than we do. But on that spectrum, your personal brain waves, body state, level of stress, level of cortisol, they change how your brain operates. They change whether it's operating in beta, alpha, theta, gamma, delta, all of which have different meanings that most people won't know, but some mean sleep, some mean alert and stressed out, some mean relaxed, and some mean incredible data processing. All people are in one of those states at all times. And I believe that when we are in what we tend to call a low vibrational state, which could be alcoholism, trauma, abuse, drug addiction, depression, things like that. Our brainwaves are operating at such a lower frequency that I believe that other things within this reality that, as you said, we only see out of the corner of our eye at that 45-degree angle for a moment, those things exist with us. We don't understand them, and some of those things bring negative energy and feelings with them. Other things, if you go in the other direction and try to bring the purity that's talked about at the very core teachings of our religions, if you try to truly open your heart to selfless love and to see the other as yourself, there's a different thing waiting at that end of the brainwave spectrum that wants your attention. And I think both of those things are existing at the same time in our reality, and we tend to call them the phenomena. And I'll wrap up by saying, of the thousands and thousands of anecdotal reports that we've all the three of us have seen and researched over the years, we know that there are numerous different shapes, sizes, morphologies, bodies, languages, operations. Everything occurs differently. Although there are things that are similar, whatever this is, it's not one source. And I think it would behoove the three of us, as perhaps as leaders in this field or as people that will be listened to ensure that people understand that though we say phenomena, that is a plural, not a singular.
There's certain things that they're doing that feels like they're almost authors in our existence. And as Lou would say, Lou told me at that same, Comic-Con convention, he said a portion of the generals he talks to when he was briefing them say, you're doing God's work, right? And another portion says, they're demons, right? And so it comes down to the limitations of one's imagination. And whenever because I'm a writer, I can't afford to be too rigid, to be too brittle, and to close up my toolbox and say, I have everything I need in here. Can't do that. I have to be open to everything. And so I found that the one common denominator in all this is that there is a spiritual component here where they do want us to get to a certain level where we are all not kind of like a hive mentality where, again, we're all here experiencing this wonderful thing. We are gifted. I mean, I'm excited about finding another planet that's Earth-like, but the odds that it's going to have the right gravity, the right sun, the right distance, all these things that's perfect. We have something that is so amazing. And so at the end of these 7 years, I find myself looking at these documentaries and realize that there's two messages that came through for me. One is to have empathy for the experiencers. That needs to stop now, because you wouldn't say to someone who got abducted by someone, you wouldn't say, oh, was the van white or was it black? Was there duct tape or rope? They do that with aliens. They go, oh, it was a ship. Was it triangular? Was it whatever? That stops now. And the second thing is that our planet is this amazing gift, and we are connected with it as much as it is with us. And we can destroy it as much as we think we can, but it'll recycle. So I'm more worried about mankind. I want our race at the end of the day to be the ones that get to be fully evolved, because if we don't make it, there's going to be another intelligence that's going to come out of this. And so it's incumbent upon us to handle the inheritance that we have and to treat it right, and to also enjoy that we don't have all the answers. Right now, the aliens, if you will, and non-human intelligence, they're giving us teasers and trailers to a fantastic movie that we're eventually going to get to see.
Well, Dean and Sean, I have a sense both of you are right, that essentially what's happening is we are being twigged. Our consciousness is being twigged by something sentient and something intelligent. But as Sean says, it's a journey that we have to make as a spiritual journey on our own in order to be able to comprehend it.